Today we're going to talk about red flags when buying a home. Now, I've been selling homes for over 15 years, so in my time I've seen a lot of red flags. And the home purchase process can be broken down into 4 different phases. In each of these phases, there are red flags that can exist that either you'll notice or the people that you're working with should be able to point out. The 4 phases are planning and preparation phase. The second is home search. The third is the transactional phase, once you already found a home. And the fourth is home ownership, once you already own the home. So let's go through different red flags that can come up in each of those 4 phases. So the first phase of your home purchase is the planning and preparation phase. And in this phase, it's very important that you understand what you're going to be buying, where you're going to be buying it, and most importantly, the team that you're going to use for this process. First red flag I want to mention is that you have no idea what your budget is. This can be problematic for a lot of reasons, but if your budget, in your head is one number, but then you speak to a lender and you realize that your actual budget is going to be half of that, you can understand how that can create a problem for your home search. Your entire search would have to change. So knowing your budget is very paramount in this process before you start actually looking at homes. You want to make sure that you have the right team assembled in order to do that. Most people will either start with a lender or a real estate agent. For either one of those, you really want to make sure you're working with someone top-notch. They are both very important key players in this transaction. So when you're choosing a real estate agent, try to understand their track record. What have they done lately? Have they sold in the area that you're looking? Have they sold a lot of homes in general? Or are they somebody that just dabbles part-time in real estate? Be careful with using somebody just because they're a friend or a relative, because if they don't have the experience to push your offer through in this market, to leverage the relationships that get made over years in this industry, then they may not be the best for you to use for this transaction. Same thing goes for a lender. A lot of times people will go online, they'll look for whatever the lowest rate says online, and they'll just choose that lender. You may end up with an appraiser that this lender hires that's not local, that has no idea about the local market and therefore underappraises your house. You may end up with a closing that's delayed because the process is very inefficient with the lender that you chose because they're handling thousands and thousands of files. So it's very important you choose the right person to handle these roles. If you have a great real estate agent, they can recommend a lender. If you have a great lender that you like, they might be able to help recommend an agent. Or if not, then definitely do your research online and consider interviewing multiple agents. Another very important key player is the attorney. Sometimes we've seen people choose an attorney that's been working with their family for a long time, only to realize that this attorney is not very experienced in real estate matters. It's very important that if you're going to work with an attorney, work with one that specializes in real estate. I would recommend that only does real estate. And the reason why is we're in a market that's very fast moving. If your attorney is stuck in court on another matter, if your attorney's unresponsive because they're dealing with different types of cases and you can't get a hold of them, this could be the reason your deal gets canceled. Sellers want to see things moving very quickly in this market, and it's very important to do that because other offers might come in on the property you're trying to purchase. If you have an attorney that's tied up in courts or that doesn't specialize in real estate, that's taking forever, these are all red flags. You really want to work with someone that specializes in real estate. Jumping back to the agent side of things, make sure your agent has a list of vendors that they like to work with. If they don't have a list of vendors, an attorney, a home inspector, a lender, that's a red flag. That would tell me that the agent hasn't been doing this for long enough. Any agent that's been in the business for a while or has done a lot of transactions would certainly have a list of people that they like to work with. And that list could be extended even further into contractors and different service providers. And on that note, in regards to an agent, one of the biggest red flags I see is an unresponsive agent. Now, I also buy real estate, and the last thing I'd want to deal with is an agent that takes days to respond to me. We live in a world where texts and quick answers to emails are the norm, if you're not getting responses in a reasonable amount of time, now I am saying be reasonable because don't expect responses in 10 seconds. People have other things going on. But if you're not getting responses that same day or within a few hours, that's a big red flag for me because that's just going to indicate how the rest of the transaction will go. So you want to work with an agent that's responsive. The other red flag about the planning phase is, as I mentioned, you want to know what and where you want to buy. What meaning do you want to buy? Single family home, townhouse, condo, co-op, multifamily home? You really want to have an idea because that's going to guide your search. And where is super important. Now, I don't always expect buyers to know exactly the neighborhood, sometimes even exactly the town where they want to buy. You can have a list of them. But to basically hone in your search on a specific town which you know nothing about also doesn't make sense to me. So you should spend a little bit of time in the area or areas where you think you may be buying a property. Don't just jump in without knowing anything about it. Some people have relatives that live in the area. Some people would read online reviews. Other people will spend time in those areas. One of those things should happen before you hone in on where you want to be. Let's move on to the home search now. So during this phase, this is when you're actually going out with your agent and going to open houses to look at properties. And there's a lot of red flags to look for when you're in this phase. I would say this is probably the most important phase to look for red flags in. Now, as you're approaching a property, one of the easiest things to spot is any potential water issues on the exterior, especially if it rained recently. If it rained recently or if it's currently raining, you want to look for pools of water, especially here in the Northeast in New Jersey. These will freeze over in the winter. Now, this is also tripping hazard, potential for lawsuits, potential for water infiltration issues into your house if those pools are close to your house. So you want to look for that. I also always look for sloping land near a house. If the land is sloping away from the house, that's a good thing because that means the water is going to be guided away from the house. If the land is sloping towards the house, like sometimes a yard is on a decline towards the house, that's a red flag because that means all of the water is going to be sloping towards your house, towards your basement, towards your foundation. So that's something on the outside you want to look for. You also want to look for potential roof issues, gutter issues, that sort. So spend some time before you walk into a house looking at the outside, looking at the perimeter of the house. Once you're inside the house, those water issues continue to be a potential threat. So you want to look for things like water spots on the ceilings, not only on the top floor, which obviously could be problems from the roof, but also on other levels, especially under bathrooms and kitchens. You also want to look for potential water issues in the basement. So if you see water spots around the perimeter walls in the basement, make sure you take note of that. I'm not saying you can't buy a home with any of these issues, any of these red flags. But what I am saying, you want to be informed. You want to know what's going on. You want to have an understanding. The biggest issues that could exist with a home are water and fire issues. So these are things you really want to pay attention to. Is there potential for water getting in? Is there potential for fire starting in my home due to various reasons? A couple of examples of potential fire hazards would be if you look at outlets in the wall where you'd plug something into and there's blacking spots around the outlets. That usually means they're either not wired properly or they're overwired or they're overused, but those are potential fire hazards. Other examples of potential fire hazards could be with a chimney that hasn't been well kept, could be with bathroom exhaust fans or dryer vent fans that have never been cleaned that look very dirty. There's a lot of potential for fire hazards. Another one is a gas smell. If you're smelling a strong smell of gas when you're in the basement or in the kitchen, obviously that could be a big potential fire hazard. So keep those things in mind as you're looking at properties. Another one that's easy to spot, especially if you have some experience with real estate, so your agent should be able to help here, is sloppy renovation work. We see this all the time. So we see contractors cut corners for various reasons. They do a sloppy job or they use cheap finishes to finish work. You really want to look for that because think about this. If this is a red flag that you're seeing just by looking on the outside of a room, a kitchen, a bathroom, that sort of thing. Imagine what's behind the walls. If they're doing sloppy finish work, then they're likely doing sloppy interior work. So definitely take a note of that. It's certainly a red flag to look for. As you're looking at homes, I mentioned coming up to the home and looking at the outside. There's also the potential for bad neighbors. And so you definitely want to look left, look right, look behind you, look across from you to see what's going on with the neighbors' homes. You could have very messy neighbors. You could have very loud neighbors. So pay attention to the noises you're hearing, because those are going to be the noises you hear when you're living at the property. If you're buying a condo, pay attention to the sounds between the walls, above or below you. These are the things that you're going to experience when living there. See if it's got some good level of insulation and soundproofing. If you're buying a house, look around. There could be people who don't mow their lawn next to you that have everything overgrown. There could be garbage piled up on their lawn. We almost bought a house once that had hoarders living next to it, and we decided against it for that reason. Because situations like those, there could be potential for pest issues, bug issues, and just a lot of different issues that come with living with very messy neighbors. Now, before you make an offer on a home, New Jersey now requires a seller to fill out a seller's disclosure. And this is basically a long form questionnaire where it asks them a bunch of questions informationally about the home. Those questions are in order for a buyer to get some information, but it also gives an opportunity for the seller to disclose issues with the property in different categories: plumbing issues, electrical issues, mechanical issues, that sort of thing. Be careful when a seller's disclosure is completely blank or is all checked unknown. That's a red flag. You want to make sure you're working with an honest seller that will let you know what's going on with the unit. And the reason why is they can be held liable if they're withholding information and you discover it later on. So you really want to have a completed seller's disclosure. And you may want to push back on one that's incomplete. Let's move on to the next phase, the transactional phase. Now, this is once you've already made an offer on a property, it's been accepted, congratulations, and now we're going to go through the process of working the deal towards closing. There are red flags that can come up during this transactional phase. First one is a seller's attorney is being very slow to respond. This is a red flag because while you're in attorney review, another offer could potentially come in that knocks you out of attorney review. Now, this is something that's exclusive to New Jersey. The way our process works is a deal is not solid until the attorney review phase is completed. And so if a seller is working with an attorney that's being very slow to respond, this opens you up for the possibility to get your offer knocked out and another one that's higher or better to come in ahead of you. So just keep this in mind that if this happens and the attorney's being very slow to respond, make sure your agent is on top of it and getting in touch with that attorney as much as possible. And if you need your attorney to push, do that as well. Okay, the next one is if you're buying a condo or a co-op for that matter. During attorney review, your attorney will request the financials for that building, for that homeowners association. And if the financials do not look good, you may want to reconsider your purchase. Now, a homeowners association exists to protect homeowners and also pool together money to split the ownership costs of a building or community. There's a lot of costs to maintain a building, including things like the roof, the exterior, the insurance for the common areas, the cleaning of common areas, and that sort of thing. If the building is operating on a budget that is negative every year or that barely can survive and they have no money in reserves, that can cause big problems for you down the road. Because if something comes up that's in need of desperate repair, like a new roof, like new facade outside, different things like that, they will ask all the owners of that building to cough up an assessment. And I've heard of those amounts being in the tens of thousands of dollars at times. So you want to be very careful and diligent in reviewing the financials for the building. On that note, you also want to review the meeting minutes, which are the documented notes from the homeowner association meetings. And you want to get those for the last 2 or so years. Make sure you're paying attention to those things because that's where you can see a lot of red flags with the building itself. Another one, if you're purchasing a condo or co-op, is the documentation of any upcoming assessments. If it's revealed to you in attorney review that, hey, there's an upcoming assessment of so-and-so amount, even if a seller has agreed to pay off that assessment, that is still a red flag, and here's why. They only are doing an assessment when they don't have enough money in reserves to pay it off outright from the current cash balance. So that means if something else comes up in the future, there's going to be another assessment. Not saying don't proceed with the purchase, but I am saying keep that in mind. It's very important. Now, if you're purchasing a home, or even a condo for that matter, red flags exist during the home inspection. Now, the point of a home inspection isn't to find every single little issue with a property so that you can back out or ask the seller to fix every single issue. The point of a home inspection is for you as a buyer to be informed when you're purchasing a property of what the problems are. With that knowledge, it's your decision whether you want to go through with the purchase. It's the seller's decision whether they want to fix any of those issues or give you a credit for those. What is important to note as a buyer and what are big red flags are structural and environmental issues. Structural issues, for example, if the house has issues with the foundation or the supporting beams or anything that can cause the house to collapse, those are issues you should be very, very serious about and very careful with. So one example is an underground oil storage tank. If the house used oil heat at some point, there may be an underground tank, and the problem is many times they can contaminate the soil, which can cause you either to spend a lot of money to remediate that or give you problems selling it down the road. Another one is mold, another one is asbestos, and another very serious one is radon, which is an odorless gas, which you'd never know you have unless you tested for it, and it causes cancer. So these are things you really want to take seriously. These are major red flags in the home inspection phase during the transactional period. Now let's talk about some red flags in the final phase. And this is when you actually own your home. Congratulations, you went through with the purchase, everything is fine until you start seeing some red flags. So here they are. Smell of gas, major red flag. You don't want to experience a gas smell anywhere in your home, whether it's the basement, the kitchen. You call your utility company immediately. They can shut off the gas. They can test for where there's any potential leaks. Another one is the smell of fire in your home. You know, there could be always something going on behind the walls that you're not seeing. So if you smell something, say something, call the fire department, see if you can get someone in there to walk around, test it, make sure everything's safe. Again, just to remind you, fire and water are your biggest two enemies when owning a home. So these are things you want to take seriously. The third one is water spots that are starting to accumulate or get bigger in your home that may have existed already. Whether they're in the basement, whether they're on the ceiling or on the walls, these are things you really want to pay attention to, and these are things you want to address as quickly as possible before they get worse. A lot of time water will travel. So if you see a spot in one place, doesn't mean it's going to be contained there. It could be running down the wall and starting to pool somewhere else and create big problems for you down the road with things like mold. All right, so if you have any water issues, that's a big red flag. Take care of it immediately. And the last thing I want to mention is red flags when it comes to contractors and different service providers that you're dealing with. If you have contractors or handyman or anybody that says they're going to show up and don't show up, that just doesn't respond to you, try to find somebody else. Ask your agent, ask your neighbors. Neighbors are actually a very good source for local contractors, handyman, different service providers, because usually they've gone through a few rounds of people. So try to find somebody that's going to be responsive and work with you. All right, so there are many more red flags in the home buying process in all these different phases. And I'm sure I forgot to mention some of the very important ones. But I just want to have you armed with this information as you're going through the purchase process. Hopefully this will help some of you. Just keep in mind, you need to keep your eyes and ears and nose open as you're going through this search, because there are a lot of potential for issues that can haunt you for many years to come. Hopefully that helps. And just remember to give us a call if you need some help with your home search.